So Malik Monk was getting a decent amount of attention leading up to the NBA draft given his scoring and shooting abilities. He attempted about 7 threes a game in college, and he shot basically 40%. So he's everything that you want as a shooter, and I think he's good enough to where it would probably translate to the NBA game pretty quickly. So I do think Monk can make an impact somewhat once he enters the NBA. I do think he has some other limitations, but I still want to ask, given that he's now on the Charlotte Hornets, a team that, to me, has a pretty decent foundation for someone like Monk to walk into, could he end up being one of the steals of the NBA draft? Well, first, if I could talk about Monk specifically, of course, anyone is going to like the shooting. To me, there are questions about how effective of a creator can he be. I think he can have the ball in his hands at times in simple pick and rolls where he can pull up from mid-range, but if I'm constantly relying on him to be in isolations and create for other guys, I don't know if Monk is ever going to be too good in that area. I kind of picture him as like a Ben Gordon sort of a player where, sure, he can have the ball in his hands and he might get 3 or maybe even 4 assists a game, but you wouldn't want him to do too much else because then it probably wouldn't be very efficient. He might get too many turnovers. He could improve at that, but that's kind of what I think he's destined to be like. And then defensively, I mean, given his thin frame, he's always going to have troubles on defense in the NBA, even if he shows a willingness to play defense and maybe he can move well enough to defend at least opposing shooting guards. But the moment he ends up on a small forward or maybe even a big point guard or 2 guard, then I think he's going to have some problems. So I would say I was a bit more down on Monk than maybe some people were. But I do still recognize the ability for him to just put points up on the board because he's a really good shooter, and he at least has some creating abilities. Now, if we apply all that to the Charlotte Hornets, I think there's an avenue for Monk to be good here. Number one is, I don't think he'll ever be asked to be the primary ball handler of this Charlotte Hornets team. Of course, Kemba Walker is your starting point guard. Nicholas Batum can have the ball in his hands. Michael Carter-Williams, while I'm not a huge fan of him, he can be a backup point guard who at least does something. There's enough guys here who can dribble the ball to where I don't think Monk is going to have the ball in his hands too often. I mean, it'll end up there sometimes, of course, but I don't think it'll be enough to where his lack of creativity is going to become an issue for them. And then when we look at what he is really good at, which is his outside shooting, I mean, Charlotte really needs 3-point shooters. This previous season, outside of Kemba Walker, the only other guy who was above average from 3 was Marco Bellinelli. Marvin Williams was like right around 35%. Nicholas Batum has been on a decline with his shooting. So they're going to need Monk right away. And luckily for Malik, Steve Clifford, the head coach of the Hornets, to me is one of the better head coaches in the NBA. His teams are always extremely well disciplined. The Hornets are always among the best in the league at not fouling, not giving up offensive rebounds, and not turning the ball over. But then on top of that, they move the ball pretty well as well. There is side-to-side movement. There's pick and rolls with Kemba Walker and Cody Zeller. There's guys moving around in what I would say is a productive offensive system, which is going to fit in very well with a guy like Malik Monk, who you can have run off of a million screens and get some open three-pointers. And I do think that's how Steve Clifford intends to use Monk. So I don't think he'll be starting just because Nicholas Batum is an established NBA player, and he definitely can't play small forward and replace Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. So I think the backup two-guard spot could be pretty useful for him. He's going to have to play with at least one other creator, but I think that's okay. And I do think there's a way for him to be a good shooter for them, probably immediately space the floor. I don't know how high his usage is going to be right away, but if he could average like, I don't know, 9 or 10 points a game and just be a good 3-point shooter for them right away, I think that's all they're going to ask for right now. And then if we move towards the future, if he can develop those other abilities, the defense, the creating and all that, then I think he could maybe potentially be a starter at the shooting guard position. But I was just talking about his defense. I think the Hornets are a fine defensive team when everyone is healthy. Last season, they were on pace to be a playoff team, and then Cody Zeller got injured, and then they fell off a cliff. They did the reverse Miami Heat. It was as if the Heat pulled a Monstars and stole all the Hornets' powers, and you get where I'm going with that one. So hopefully Cody Zeller just doesn't get hurt this year. But also, they did acquire Dwight Howard. Now, I don't know if Dwight's going to be content with however that center rotation's going to go. To me, Dwight will probably be the starter, even if I think Cody Zeller is a better defensive player at this point. And they're both going to play like 20-something minutes a game. I don't know if Dwight's going to buy in. We're just going to have to wait and see. But if he does, then they could be an excellent defensive team. And then if we're looking at their defense just overall, Nicholas Batum, I would say, overall is an okay enough defender. I would say he's kind of inconsistent in the sense of one game he will look like one of the better defenders in the NBA, and then the next game he'll look like one of the worst ones. Or maybe not one of the worst ones, but he'll be a little disappointing. But then when you look at Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, he's one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA. Marvin Williams can switch pretty well. And then you have the two good defensive centers on top of Steve Clifford just knowing how to coach defense. And I do think Malik can be surrounded by enough good defense to where his potential lack of it won't kill you. And I think that's about all you can ask for of Malik Monk in his rookie season. I actually think he's in a unique situation where he could be a rookie who actually makes his team better right away because they can use what he's good at and then they can hide the things that he's not good at while he improves on those things. I'm typically someone who says rookies don't make your team better because they usually just don't. But I think Malik, in a somewhat limited role, maybe 15 to 20 minutes or maybe 25 minutes a game, can just be a shooter, and hopefully he's not terrible enough defensively to where you can have him out there. And I think Charlotte definitely needs that because of his shooting and their lack of it this previous season.